Hello, everybody. I'm Melissa McKay. I'm a developer advocate with JFrog, and I have the pleasure today to be speaking with Tracy Ragan. She is the CEO and co-founder of DeployHub. We're talking about SwampUp 2023 this year, and our theme is Ready for Next. So Tracy, I'm going to let you introduce yourself a little bit, let our audience know who you are and what you've been up to these days.
Yeah, I'm around. People have met me over the course of the years. As you said, I'm a co-founder and CEO of a little company that called DeployHub. We are all about gathering DevOps and security intelligence into one central evidence store with the dream of being able to actually build some AI threat models, do generative pipeline creation. There's so much that could be done if we start centralizing this kind of data from all the companies and all the open source tools that are looking at solving the problem of security and tighter pipeline models. And I've been involved in the OpenSSF. I've been involved in the Continuous Delivery Foundation. And I first started doing open source work with the Eclipse Foundation when I was the lone woman on the board for about 4 years.
You have a lot of experience. I'm so excited that you're coming to SwampUp. I know I met you there last year as well. It was a great experience, a great time. You had one of the best talks, I think, that we've had.
Thank you.
So
thank you so much.
always a wonderful person to add to our team. So you mentioned a lot of interesting things just in your intro, and I want to pick on one just because since our theme is Ready for Next, you mentioned AI. And this is a hot topic now, but what you also mentioned is an actual use case that makes sense to me for, getting our production systems up and running in a way that makes sense. You mentioned threat modeling.
Yes, threat modeling.
Lots of ideas here, and this sounds exactly like something we should be preparing for. What is your opinion?
100%. My opinion is that when I say we, I want to say all of the companies, all of the engineers in the space of DevOps and supply chain, we focus on what we know best. And that's what everybody should be focusing on to solve particular problems, whether it be generating SBOMs for containers or working on signatures or something on the other side, looking at network security. We all have data that comes from a different perspective, but you can't do anything with it unless we start centralizing it. And I have been talking about this for a while because I'm passionate about it. If we think about where we came from in CI/CD, we were doing work on an application basis. If we were just doing monolithic application development today, and we weren't thinking about decoupling and really creating the next generation of software, then this question about security would be so much easier, because at least we would have security at a monolithic application level. But now, in a decoupled environment, which most companies should be going to because it's much more efficient, we are only collecting data at the individual package or container level. So we lose what I like to call an organizational profile. And we don't have data that says, I'm Bank of America. Show me all of my CVEs for everything running in my entire environment for test or fraud, right? So we have siloed it so much, we can't present that information. And enterprises are struggling with that. And they keep asking for more log visibility. They need that log visibility because they need these answers, but it has to be more than just log visibility. So I'm super focused right now on solving this problem. In a CI/CD world, if you think about what we're really doing is we're saying, if you change one shared service across the spectrum of your environments, you potentially could create 10 or 15 new release candidates. And in the old days, we did that because we did a build and we had an application pipeline and we managed it that way. And we may have an application release candidate that never went to production. Right. But now in a decoupled environment, you send a microservice out that impacts 15 different applications. you have 15, you had 15 release candidates that actually got deployed, and the application team may never know it. And you have a new SBOM for those 15. You could, if things change that much, you may have a drastically different SBOM for those applications. So in essence, what we're doing is we're collecting, centralizing that data to actually be kind of a new CI server, continuously showing what was integrated, right? Instead of doing the integration, exposing the integration, and then starting to provide data that we can chew on, and we can do something with it, make it actionable. And that's where eventually AI is going to come from, somewhere where the data is centralized. So we have to have that data.
That totally makes sense. And, having all of this in one place too, I imagine if anything were to go wrong, heaven forbid, a vulnerability, for example, was introduced into the system somewhere and you need to fix it, it would be nice to know what the impact of that is, like how much of your system is affected, how many services are affected.
The blast radius was the first thing that we started working on with the DeployHub and Ortelius, because we felt that was the first bit of information people should understand is when a lower level dependency is changed, who does it impact? And then we can start thinking about even lower than that. If we think about Salsa and what the Guac team is working on and creating these graph dependencies for all the lower level packages, we can take that Guac information and roll it all the way up to say if a lower level package got changed, we know all of the applications and all of the components that are consuming that in these environments, so we can report that completely out. So we really are working on building an ecosystem of that data. Our dream is to be the hub of all of the evidence for what we like to call deployment data.
Right.
There, was it signed? Was it, was there linting? What was, did they have a scorecard? What was their compliance levels? Where were they deployed? And sometimes we get in this conversation about signatures and whatnot, and we forget what we are trying, the what in the question, right? Yes. Signatures for what? Is it just for a piece of source code or this particular container? But that's just one object in thousands.
Right.
So what do we start? We have to figure out now, what are we actually managing? Are we managing an environment? Are we managing an organization? Are we managing an application? Are we managing a domain? Because we have now a really decoupled environment that we now need to figure out how to manage.
Right.
Right. And the evidence is what we need.
Yes. And you have this layer that needs to make decisions based on this data. Right.
Oh my goodness. And it would be wonderful if it did the decision making all on its own based on models.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. This is something we should absolutely be preparing for what's next. I think one of the goals or one of the ideas that I see coming out in this next Swamp Up specifically is just this idea that we need to get ahead of it. Stop getting behind the whack-a-mole system where, you just take in one CVE at a time, for example, and conquer that and then move on. We need to go bigger than that, a little bit wider than that. And instead of being so reactive, start planning for things that are coming down the pipe, things that we can do better so that we can give ourselves a little bit of reprieve from the constant mess of trying to keep things updated and keep things secure.
And just have basic intelligence. So, vulnerabilities come up all the time. Right. You as an application team or even a feature team that's building services that other teams are consuming, your component may suddenly have several vulnerabilities in it. Well, which one do you address first? Exactly. It would be very nice for the system to be able to say, these are the vulnerabilities and this is the top one you should fix. This is super red. It's blinking, it's on fire, but the other ones are just kind of lukewarm. They're not quite that high on that Scoville, test. They're not that hot. So how do you start managing those situations, which is one of the use cases. And then just being able to prune a dependency tree. This is something that Steve Taylor talks about often. How do you prune that dependency tree? Why do we have to have so many dependencies in a hello world?
Right.
We need, if we could prune them, then we reduce we reduce the attack surface.
Yep.
So these are the things that we got to prepare for. This is the stuff we have to start thinking about as developers to start fixing.
Yes. And there's been attempts in the industry. I mean, all with good intentions, of course. There's been attempts to try to, categorize vulnerabilities, give people an idea of what would be more important than others. But in the reality today, in a system, it's contextual. Some don't apply. Some are going to be more important for you than for the other app down the street, right? This
Yes.
totally makes sense.
Yes. Everything is relative, right?
Yep, exactly.
The theory of relativity really does apply.
Well, you and I serve on the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation's TOC together. So
Yes.
this is really cool. And you have a ton of foundation experience. And this is something you also said when you introduced yourself. Where do you think foundations play in this game? What is it? What should the goal be to improve these environments, to improve the livelihood of developers? That's really what I care about the most. Where do they play in this game?
It really depends on the foundation. So, for example, when I started, first time I had ever been on a large board was with the Eclipse Foundation. It was a really great learning experience for me. But at the time, we were really looking at building an ecosystem to simplify a developer's efforts at Workday, right?
Right.
How do we make their lives easier? Why do they have to have all these tools? Can we centralize and build an ecosystem around one particular platform, which was obviously Eclipse? So that was their mission. And every foundation needs to have some very clear spoken mission. What is the mission of every one of those foundations? Sometimes in working with foundations, the mistake that is made is we might have a mission, but we don't know who our persona is. It's an area that I constantly talk about in any of the meetings that I'm associated with, any of the foundations, any of the boards I'm on, because we really need to identify the personas and their particular hotspot, what their needs are, and why are we servicing that particular persona. And I believe that's a mistake for a lot of foundations, is that, and a lot of companies, the persona puzzle is hard for everyone, especially in our industry. Who is our persona in DevOps or DevSecOps? Or supply chain, whatever you're going to call it. Who is that end user that we're servicing? And because there are so many of those end users, we have to be careful to not just put everybody in one bucket and assume that they're going to understand what we're talking about. So those personas are critical, and messages based on those personas. A CISO officer is going to be more interested in hearing me talk about an organizational level security profile than a software developer who's going to say, hey, I want to know if the container I just created is using two different versions of the same package.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
so
very different perspectives.
We have to be careful, and we have to understand and be sympathetic to our who we're serving, even though we may have a high level mission. And that is the biggest challenge I believe that foundations run into, is what are their personas that they want to reach out to. And I say that because it's something I have to preach to myself as a small business. I constantly have to think about, who am I talking to? Because if I don't, I'm not going to be successful. I used to tell people all the time, you don't want to get on the phone and start selling chlorine and find out the person you're talking to doesn't have a swimming pool. Right,
exactly. Yeah.
You're wasting your time.
Yeah. That's a good analogy.
Sometimes I think we try to sell chlorine to people who don't have swimming pools.
Yep, I totally see that as well. We can do better. I know that's something as a developer advocate too. I don't always land in the center when it comes to figuring out who I'm actually, talking to. It's easy to touch on all the things and not be focused enough to really land on what someone is interested in or what their needs are. So yeah, that really makes sense. Well, I'm looking forward to your talk that you're going to be doing this year. And I have the title as Secure Your DevOps Pipeline with New Security Tooling.
Yes.
There's a ton of stuff out there now, right?
There is. Over the last 2 years since Log4j, open source communities and commercial companies have been pushing out new tools to solve really critical problems that we never addressed before. We're
Mhm.
starting to think about things like provenance and attestation and, SBOMs. The government's now saying you have to give me an SBOM. So there's a whole group of new kinds of tools. The biggest problem we have in the industry is understanding where those new tools fit
Mhm.
and being able to upgrade our pipelines. When you
Right.
have potentially, let's just say CloudBees alone or Jenkins alone has probably 20 million or more pipelines. Add all the other tools, we're looking at doubling that easily. So from a larger global community, we have a lot of pipelines to update with this new tooling.
Exactly.
And doing it the way we've done it before, statically, kind of sucks.
It's too slow.
Because
yeah.
it's too slow. And not only that, you cannot go, okay, I'm now going to add SBOM generation to all of my pipelines and let it get it used. So
Right.
I preach a lot about CD events. I'm a big believer in CD events. And I think more end user companies should get involved in understanding what CD events is and start thinking about disrupting their pipeline process in order to take advantage of all this great new tooling. Because if we had a nice event processor and we had a listener and everybody understood the payload, we'd get rid of all of the plugins. We'd have one place to manage it all. We have the use cases all laid out, which that team has done a great job with, a lot of use cases around CI/CD testing, tons of them.
Mhm.
And we're going to have to start working on the security ones. But
Yeah.
if we can get CD events if we can elevate that project and more people get involved in understanding why it's important, we will be able to address the adoption issue of new security tooling, because that's a barrier for a lot of companies because they just can't update all those pipelines. And then we'll be able to move forward.
Yeah.
But right now we're kind of we're in the doldrums. We're kind of stuck with these very static pipelines, and to update them all, it seems, well, let's just update. We'll just do the new ones correct. But then
Yeah.
you've got all those old ones and you're not managing anymore. So
Yeah.
it's a puzzle.
Man, just when you think that you've got everything solved, everything's working, then someone turns over a rock, a bug crawls out, and you've got everything's changed. Everything's different now.
Well, that's why
A
I
lot
love
of
this
work to do.
industry. This industry is fun because you never stop learning and you
Mhm.
never stop changing. And when the minute you do stop changing, and we sort of did that in the pipeline, you cause problems for yourself.
Yep. Yep. Well, everything keeps us on our toes, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Keeps
That's
us
one of the
young,
reasons I love it too.
I love it. I do.
Well, Tracy, it was a pleasure talking with you. I'm excited to see you at Swamp Up. Looking forward to our next time together, and also looking forward to your talk. I think it's going to be very interesting, and a lot of our audience would be really interested in what you have to say
Thank
about
you.
security tooling, especially.
And thank you for inviting me to Swamp Up and this interview.
Thank you.